Hello, welcome back. So, in our previous sessions, we actually explored LLDB, right? And also we understood the prerequisites of low-level debugger or the debugger. That is debug symbols. Not only the executable, but also the debug symbols should exist. Both of these are there, we can comfortably debug. Cool. So now having those things in place, what will happen if I go back to the Visual Studio Code? No help yet, right? So now what happens is that still, even if all those things exist, Visual Studio Code is not at all aware about it, okay? So we need to tell that Visual Studio Code, hey, this is where the executable exists, okay? So that you can actually go ahead and start a debug session, okay? To do that, either we can use this option. Earlier, you remember, right? Whenever you press this, you used to get some options, isn't it? Those options are missing now. The reason is we have actually removed that .VSCode folder also. You remember that, right? So now we will see how to bring it back. That is needed. That is where we instruct the Visual Studio Code, okay, how to proceed with debugging, about how to proceed with the debugging. So now we are back here. Let's try this. Why not, right? This button is waiting for us to click. Let's click. The moment we do, it brings up these options. I can actually compile and debug the current file, right? It's a helpful message option. So let's try that. Why not, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So when we try the single file, right? Let's see what it does. Of course, it gives an error. Let's see what errors are being shown to us. So what it says is that I don't understand this test prime that you are talking about here, right? Because of that, this debug session cannot proceed actually. I cannot proceed further because there is an error. I cannot link this symbol because now we have told that you only compile the single file and try to run it, isn't it? It is not possible. But of course, if you remove this and put some other code which does not require external symbol, it is going to succeed. You can do normal debugging. I will leave it as an exercise. I think most of us would have already done that as well, I think. If not, try that out. I will leave it as an exercise. Of course, it should not have any external symbols like test prime. All code should exist in the same file, right? Imagine that test prime is defined here itself. We are simply calling it. Then it will work just like that, right? Will not create any problems. But by doing that, one thing will happen here, right? .VSCode will be, that folder will be created because we ran that option, isn't it? You can create that manually also, but its name should be .VSCode. It's a hidden folder actually. And in that, it creates something called as tasks.json. Okay. All right. So right now, I'm not interested in that. So I'm going to delete that. We'll talk about that. We'll come back to that very soon. But now again, I will go back and let's try the other option. This option is not going to help us because we have multiple files. Single file is not our use case. We have multiple files, isn't it? Referring to each other. So let's go for a launch.json file. Here is where we can instruct further, right? We can instruct more. So here it says, what do you want to do? You want some configurations, right? We'll say we want this launch configuration, C++ launch. This is the same thing we did in the low-level debugger also. We did that process launch, isn't it? It's the same thing. The moment we do that, what happens is that it will give a name. This name can be anything, okay? And request type must be CPP debug. There can be different types of configurations. Right now, we will focus on CPP debug. You can definitely refer the documentation, and also I will provide a link in the description of this video, which you can refer further if you are interested. Request is launch, of course. Program is this, right? So this is a.out, and this, what is this dollar, right? That is an environment variable which gets injected into VS Code's environment. So workspace folder is nothing but this folder, right? The root of your the root folder, right? It's the programming folder in our case. That is also known as workspace folder. Inside that, please search this program a.out. We are telling, okay? So it is going to go for looking this a.out. And we are saying, please also ensure when you run this command, for the debugging purpose, ensure that your current working directory is file dir name. instead of that, this is also another environment variable. Current files directory is what it means. You can replace that for consistency this, okay, because that is where the a.out file exists. So I will replace that. Other things I am going to keep them as is. I'm not going to modify them. Okay, minimal configurations. Just we are telling VSCode here is where the a.out, and under the hood we also have ensured that the debug symbols are also created. We already know now that debug symbols are needed. How did we do that? Simply we ran which command we ran? This command, isn't it? So whenever we used to run this command, it used to create this debug symbols. Then only our debugging can take place. Now if I go here, LLDB launch, the exact name that we have given here will appear. Probably debug prime, right? Let's say this, whatever, right? So probably this makes sense. So the same name appears here. So you should give a meaningful name so that you can identify the configuration you have. Okay, you can have multiple configurations also. Right now we are contented with one. Well, it appears now. Whenever I press this button, it goes and finds out this executable and launches it. And if there are debug symbols, your debugging will work correctly. Otherwise, it will start struggling. Okay, I will leave that as an exercise. Okay, I want you to try that as well, but I am not going to do that. It's because you also need some work, isn't it? So some interesting work. So remove the debug folder and attempt this. So now it is there. So your debugging will work just fine. Yeah, it works. Okay, let me close this, right? But let's say now I go and do some modifications here and I want to debug. What should I do? I should ensure that this is run. Then only I should go and run this, right? So then only my debug session will consider the latest and greatest changes. Otherwise, I will be out of sync, isn't it? I will be debugging an executable which is obsolete, right? That shouldn't be the case. So for that, of course, I can set up the chokidar, but you know what? You don't need to do that. Visual Studio Code itself can help you. Right? So for that, I can ask Visual Studio Code, hey, inside VSCode folder, I can create something called as tasks.json. Yes, we can instruct Visual Studio Code to perform some tasks. Okay, how do we write the specification of tasks? So for this, I am going to put some content here, right? This, right? To save time, right? Of course, I want you to go and refer some documentation, or even ChatGPT can help you. You can copy paste this there and go through it. I think it gives a wonderful document, but don't use that. Instead, you might want to refer the actual documentation also. Okay, if you don't want to use ChatGPT, that is also fine. Right now, let me briefly explain. Label which identifies this particular task. Again, this is an array. You can have multiple tasks. And a task can be a build task or test task. Okay, ours is a build task. So unfortunately, the naming is a little confusing, but that is how it is. And yeah, same workspace folder, that environment variable we are using. We want to be in that folder, and we want the task is this. Okay, command. You should run this command cc with these options, arguments. Start.c -g to generate those debug symbols, -o is to generate an executable with the given name. You can omit these two also. By default, it will anyway create with the a.out, right? But if you want some other name, you can definitely do that here. I will leave it as is. And problem nature is GCC. This is a option that you need to supply so that Visual Studio Code understands under the hood. It should use right debugger, right compiler environment. And so that is this option. Okay, so you should supply this. This is a minimal setup to create a task. Now I can run this task. How do I run this task? I can invoke it here. I can say run build task. So whenever I say run build task, it is going to pick up this. And I also have set up the default true. Since I have set this, so this is always going to wire to the default task at any given point of time. Okay, like that. That is a way to run that. So I can, how do you bring up the command palette? Control Shift P in Windows and Command Shift P in Mac. So the first option itself is coming here like that. So to see whether this works or not, let me delete these debug symbols. Also, let me debug a.out, right? So both of these are deleted now. Now let me bring up the command palette and choose the first option. Let's see what it does. See, the task is running, and the moment task is run, a.out and debug symbol is already created. Okay, now you can use this command palette, run this, right? And then you have to go to the debugger, right? True, it works. But again, 2 steps. We don't want that. You know what? You can wire the tasks dependency inside launch.json. Here I can say, hey, before you launch the debugger, can you ensure pre-launch task, right? In our case, we had a task, right, with this name, build C files. I can tell this, right? And instead of 2 steps, now it becomes just 1 step. All that I can go to the debugger. So this, boom, it runs the pre-launch task, build C files task, and then starts the debugging, right? With this, we have a solid debugger setup done in VSCode, and we can now go ahead and debug our source code. Incredible. I hope you have come across so long. I appreciate your efforts. There is one more concept that we would like to cement, that is preconditions. I think we haven't explored that. That is one more aspect that we need to know, because we need to ensure that the parameters or arguments that are coming inside a function also should adhere to certain preconditions, right? That is something we will explore in our next session. See you there.